It turns out the Panama Canal does have some secrets that allow it to save upwards of 1 billion gallons of water every single day. This video is only going to look at the importance of water for the canal and their water saving methodology. So how does it work and what else can be done? Let's figure this out together. I'm Ricky and this is 2-Bit Vinci. This video is sponsored by War Thunder. But to get a really full picture of what's going on here at the canal, we decided let's do a little helicopter tour and see if we can't see it from the sky. Unlike the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal isn't a sea level canal, so ships have to ascend 26 meters up the Panamanian terrain and then back down to sea level. So how do you make a ship go uphill? Well, with a clever series of locks. I'm here at the Miraflores Visitor Center, and behind me are the two main locks of the Panama Canal. And if you look in the distance over there, there's a massive ship on the other side. It's absolutely amazing that you can lift a 110,000 ton cargo ship just by adding water. Did you know that the Pacific side of the canal is about 20 centimeters or 8 inches higher than the Caribbean Atlantic side? But it gets even more interesting when you factor the differences in tides. At the entrance to the Panama Canal, the Pacific Ocean can rise as much as 20 feet, but the difference between high tide and low tide in the Atlantic is just 3. For this reason, the 3 locks are broken out into 2 sets on the Pacific, the Miraflores locks and the single Pedro Miguel lock. On the Atlantic side, the Gatun locks are a single 3-stage locking system. The 3 locks combine lift and drop ships 26 meters above sea level. So how much water is consumed per vessel transit? It may not be immediately obvious, but it's only the volume required to fill the first lock. This of course is repeated up and down for a total of the volume of water in the first lock times 2. There are also 2 types of locks, the original Panamax locks from 1914 and more recently the new bigger Neo-Panamax locks built to handle larger cargo ships. Here are the dimensions of both types of locks. The older Panamax locks contain roughly 25.5 million gallons of water, and the Neo-Panamax locks hold 55.8 million. So each full transit consumes 51 million gallons of water and 111.6 million gallons of water, respectively. To understand why only the first lock volume matters, let's take a quick look at the full transit across the Panama Canal. We'll call this working volume of water that fills the first lock V. To lift a boat up from the Pacific, first the boat enters the first lock, which is at sea level. Then the volume V of water is drained from lock 2 to lock 1, equalizing their heights. Then the ship sails along to lock 2, where a volume V of water released from lock 3 fills lock 2 to equalize their height. Finally, a volume V of water is released from the reservoir to lift the ship up lock 3 to the canal level. On the next transit, a volume V of water in lock 1 needs to be drained into the Pacific, and then the process begins anew. Fun fact, that V we talked about is only the working volume of water. There's still static water needed to lift the ship's hull. If you look at lock 1, part of it is submerged in the ocean, which means salt water is mixed with the fresh water and is diluted with each lock transition back into the reservoir. This results in Gatun Lake becoming slightly salty, but it's monitored closely and held in check with a constant feed of fresh water from the Chagres River. Now, there is one clever way to save water with the old Panamax locks, but before I get into that, let's start with the more obvious Neo-Panamax locks. These locks were built in 2016 to service larger vessels, and unlike the older locks that ran 2 sets of locks in tandem, the Neo-Panamax locks are a single lane service. But do you notice these 3 basins next to each lock? Well, that's where the magic happens. The Neo-Panamax locks were controversial because they used even more water per transit, and they opened at a time of severe drought, much like the recent drought of 2023 and 2024 due to the El Nino event. Watching canal operations, I was blown away by how tight a fit it was for each ship to pass through. But remember that the volume of water lost in each transit is a function of the length times width times height of the lock chamber, so they made them as tiny as possible. One of the big national interests of the United States to build the Panama Canal was to allow the passage of their warships between the Pacific and the Atlantic. This is a huge naval advantage, and the effects of the Panamax locks impact Navy ship size and design to this day. And if you're into military history, aviation, and naval engineering like I am, you'll love our sponsor this week, War Thunder, the free-to-play game available on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. It's the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and I played quite a bit on my trip to Panama. You can captain over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations. And the detailed physics are sublime. There's always a weak link in engineering. And in War Thunder, you don't just have hitboxes, you have detailed individual components. My favorite are amazing naval battles and trying to target engines to immobilize and turrets to limit retaliation. You can even play in VR. Come join the over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today with War Thunder. Use my special link in the description to play for free and get a massive bonus pack. Huge thanks to War Thunder and you. Now back to the show. Okay, so what about the Neo Panamax locks? It grows in length and width and uses nearly 30 million more gallons of water per transit compared to the old locks. Except it doesn't. Even though it's over double the amount of water, it actually uses less water per transit than the traditional locks. Looking at the Pacific side, gone are the two separate sets of locks. Instead, a separate higher reservoir was built to bypass the Pedro Miguel lock straight to a single set of 3 locks called the Cocoli locks. Here, each of the locks is accompanied by 3 water basins off to the side. Clearly, the Neo Panamax locks are bigger, so let's call that working volume of water V nu. If we break up V nu into 5 equal parts, then stagger each of these 3 water basins by an equal amount, we can recoup up to 60% of the water. Here's how. To lower a Neo Panamax locks, V1 is drained entirely into Basin 1, V2 is drained into Basin 2, and V3 is drained into Basin 3. 4 and 5 are wasted. To fill the lock back up, first Basin 3 is filled back in, then Basin 2, then Basin 1. Now you only need to get 2/5 of the volume of water from the reservoir. 3/5 or 60% of water was saved. Genius, right? But the old Panamax locks, not to be outdone, have a trick up their sleeve too. And it's something that really surprised me and it took me about 2 hours of watching canal operations to finally figure out. Check out this time lapse of the Panamax locks and tell me what you see. Right there. Did you notice what happened? Instead of dumping water from the top lock down to lock 2, they equalize the locks side by side. It doesn't happen every time, because the biggest drawback with the old Panamax locks is that it depends on the flow of traffic. Here we have 2 ships ready to enter the Miraflores locks heading to the Pacific. But instead of filling the right lock, which is now low, with fresh water from the reservoir and having both ships go together, they only let the ship on the left in. Then to lower the ship on the left, they cross-fill 50% of the water into the right channel, equalizing the levels. Then the remaining 50% on the left channel is wasted, and now only 50% of the right channel needs to be filled. By doing this, they save 50% of the water needed. But looking at another passage, you see they don't wait to fill the right chamber this time. Instead, they fill it up as the ship enters on the left. Why? Because below off camera, another ship is heading north from the Pacific into the canal on the right. Another ship is already queued up on the left to head south. Behind me is the Causeway Amador. This is the entrance from the Pacific side into the Panama Canal. You can see quite a bit of a queue, even though we are not at full capacity. It's not like the peak season and all that stuff, but you can still just see constant activity. This is the great challenge of the Panamax locks, to try to manage cross traffic to reduce water loss as much as possible while not keeping ships waiting and losing out on daily revenue. Remember that even though the Panama Canal is the shortcut, it still takes between 8 and 11 hours to cross. And each lock fill or drain can take between 10 and 15 minutes. So while the Neo Panamax locks can save 60% of their working volume of water on every transit, the older Panamax locks can at best save 50% and at worst save nothing at all. The next strategy the canal uses to save water is simultaneous lockages. Here you can see 2 smaller vessels that combined fit within the length of the Panamax locks, and both travel together. This saves more than 50% of the water because the hull of each vessel displaces even more water, meaning less is required to fill it up. But larger vessels displace even more water and pay much higher tolls, so let's just call this a 50% reduction. This strategy works on both older and newer locks. Finally, the canal is also equipped with inner and outer gates. For the longest vessels, the inner gates remain open and the outer gate is closed, resulting in the largest possible volume of water. But the smaller vessels, they use the inner gate to save 2 million gallons per lock on the Panamax locks and 6.5 million gallons on the Neo Panamax locks. All of this is equal parts brilliant and necessary because moving all that water requires no electricity. It's all powered purely by gravity. The only electricity needed for the canal is electric motors, some lighting, and the mules that keep the ships centered. One question you may be asking is if the water wasted is only the water required to fill the first lock, why not have 13 locks, each dropping 2 meters each? That would save nearly 80% of the water needed. But in engineering, there's always a trade-off. 13 steps to traverse is much more complex, requires huge amounts more land, more concrete, and more maintenance. Plus, it would also add hours of transit time. You have to remember that for the canal, it's all about getting as many ships in and out as possible to generate millions of dollars per day. The second question you're probably thinking is, if droughts are an occasional problem, why not install a water pump and pump the water on the last lock back into the reservoir instead of dumping into the ocean? Well, I thought about that too, so I did the math. Looking at the Panamax locks, we know we have to pump 25.5 million gallons of water one way, which is 96.5 million liters. The beauty of the metric system is that that's also the weight in kilograms. We also know the acceleration of gravity, the height we need to pump it, 26 meters, and that we have to pump all this water in 600 seconds or 10 minutes because that's how fast they fill and drain currently. Power is the work done over time, or the change in energy over time. If we use the low lock water height as 0, then we just have the mass times gravity times H2, which is 26 meters, all over 600 seconds. That means we would need a 41,000 kilowatt pump, which is insanely massive. And to understand the energy required, we need to multiply that by the time that the pump runs, which is 10 minutes or 1/6 of an hour, which gives us 6,839 kilowatt hours or 6.8 megawatt hours of energy. But that's only one way. So to cover 30 ships per day, both ways, we'd use 410 megawatt hours of energy. And at Panama's electricity price of 18 cents per kilowatt hour, it would cost $73,800, which sounds insane. But remember that the canal made $3.6 billion in 2021, which works out to nearly $10 million per day. But there are so many other challenges and so many other amazing facts that I couldn't fit into just one video. So hit that like button, share this video on social media, and don't forget to subscribe because we have a follow-on video with much more amazing stuff that I learned on my trip to Panama. Plus, you'd be supporting us, going on site and paying for these videos in the future. And don't forget to support War Thunder, our sponsor this week. Check out the links in the description and subscribe for much more amazing engineering content. All right, see you next week.
Duck. That's so active.